This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Links to learn more about our guest today can be found in the show notes. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon.com. By joining on Patreon, you help keep Beyond the Big Screen sustainable and get many great benefits. Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more and sign up. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Thank you for joining us again on Beyond the Big Screen. Thank you for joining Mustache Chris and I as we begin a short series on horror movies and getting ready for the Halloween spirit. And even if you're not listening during the Halloween time period, which we're not currently in as recording and live streaming, but it's coming up. And I mean, you can enjoy Halloween and horror movies all year round. Today, we're going to talk about the 1982 John Carpenter drama horror classic, The Thing. This does not easily check boxes, so we're in for a really interesting conversation. Now, first off, when we started talking about doing some Halloween movies, if people go back to last year, we did Coco, and that was a little bit of surprising. It surprised Mustache too. Why did you go with your first pick was The Thing?
One of the people that comment on our Facebook page all the time, Sean, I believe his name is, we had a back and forth about this movie, and he said he was a big fan of it. So, and I'm a huge fan of this film, and I mean, at the time that it came out, it really wasn't appreciated, and it's over time has become a cult classic. And I figured, this is one of my favorite horror films, if not my favorite horror film. And I don't know, I figured there'd probably be enough people who listen to our show who hadn't seen it or maybe hadn't heard of it.
Now, a little of the background on it. It's based on a novella by John W. Campbell, and he's one of these 50s sci-fi. He kind of reminds me of Robert Heinlein in a way that he went through a couple of different political phases, but he had some strong political feelings. And the short story is called Who Goes There? And it's almost the exact same concept. I think the movie really faithfully, at least in the setting, got the idea of the movie taking place in Antarctica, and it's completely remote and everything is completely shut down, which that really sets the tone of the movie. Once those characters are locked into the ice space in Antarctica, it becomes a one-stage play, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned you had. I haven't read the short story myself. You said it was good though, right?
Yeah, I haven't. For full disclosure, I haven't finished it all, but I read about a quarter of it, and it's pretty good. It has the very same tone that the movie has of just a real slow burn of building tension, which is something we'll definitely get into as we talk today. Now, what do you say? Where should we start off with this movie?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I guess we could start with, I guess we're going back to Ancient Aliens, throwback to Prometheus. Yeah, so basically, like in the first shot of the film, we see it's an alien spaceship that crashes onto Earth, and then we quickly find out that it's crashed in the Antarctic and frozen the ground along with the alien. I mean, to me, I really like this idea because I find it somewhat believable, because for the most part, human beings could not go to Antarctica because it's, uninhabitable. It's realistic, I think, in the sense that something like we think that there's different things frozen underneath the ice in the Antarctic, but we can't really get to them because it's so deep. And I mean, to me, it seems like a very plausible scenario where, potentially maybe we do find aliens that visited this planet, or something of that nature if we start like actually just digging underneath the surface of the ice in Antarctic.
It really sets a story too. I think that when you have that closed environment, nothing's coming in and nothing can go out, then you can really play with those ideas and the themes that this movie really hits on to.
Yeah, I mean, well, what's your opinion? Do you think like the organism or what have you that ends up causing all the mayhem on the base, do you think it was in the spaceship, or do you think, and that's what caused this alien to crash, or do you think like the alien itself is the organism and there's something went wrong with the ship and that's why he crashed the way he did?
I might be getting the movie and the novel mixed up, but they kind of set it up that it could have been a parasite on the ship too. And I think that that's a really interesting theory or an idea to explore, because who knows if a spaceship ever crashed on the Earth, what would go on? They talked about it in the book. It was MacReady was the main character played by Kurt Russell, that, what if we get a disease from this thing? And the doctor basically said, well, even amongst animals, bacteria and most diseases can't jump from a snake to a human. So that's what they based on, just ripping this organism apart, is by saying that it's so far removed from humans that it could never do anything to them. And I think that that's playing with that idea of, we don't know what the heck is going on with aliens. And if our first contact is with a bunch of roughnecks, that we're not going to get a real clear scientific view of it. We're going to get a survival situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a really interesting concept to think about. I mean, there's a lot of like crazy. You ever heard this like conspiracy theory about like octopuses?
No.
That
they're aliens?
They're actually like aliens. And I mean, if you would just sit and watch videos of octopuses, they're incredibly weird. Like the way they change color and the way they float in the water and everything like that, it doesn't seem like something of this planet.
I think that that's one thing that a lot of people are always looking to outer space for new discoveries, when we have oceans that we have no idea what's going on in the oceans. They find new things every day that are weirder and creepier than almost anything you could imagine in outer space. And I think in a lot of ways, maybe I'm a little controversial here, I think we're wasting a lot of money on space travel when we could be exploring our own planet that we don't really know much about.
Well, yeah, and then to bring it back to the movie, I mean, the polar ice caps, right? We got like thousands of feet of ice that potentially could hold all different types of secrets, maybe an alien spacecraft in this case, but hopefully not this type of alien, because it doesn't go very well.
So let's talk about this theme of isolation, because I think that that's probably the key theme to the whole movie. And that's what really turns up all of the other emotions that all these characters feel. Let's talk about their isolation.
Yeah, if you take the movie as a whole, I find the first half of the movie sets up the isolation really well. And then once we get to the other theme that we'll talk about, but yeah, the first half of the movie, I think, does a really good job of setting up just how isolated these guys are. Like it's the frozen tundra, right? There's nothing there but, ice and snow. And there's only a small group of them. And you can't even go too far away from the base, especially because if you get hit by a storm, that's it, you're gone. I know it's crazy to think, but in the movie, they depict them holding onto a line. Usually you'd be clip onto the line. That's an actual thing. If you fall off that line, you're a goner. I remember watching a documentary. I think it was Herzog did this one where these people living in the Antarctic, like, as he was fascinated what type of person would actually do this job. And so they do a bunch of like different tests in case you ever did get lost. There's this one where they put like a bucket on a person's head to mimic snow blindness, and you can't see anything. So they set that up really well, like right from the get-go, in my opinion. And then even the Norwegians who are hunting this dog that's running to the other base in this helicopter, I mean, they get into contact with humans and with our main characters, and they're unable to communicate with each other because he speaks Norwegian and they speak English. So even between them, they're isolated. I mean, and you can even argue that the alien is isolated too. I mean, he's been cut off from his host civilization, his host planet for, I don't know, they say 100,000 years, could be longer. They're just guessing. So like even everyone, the Norwegians are isolated, the humans are isolated, and then this alien in a lot of ways is isolated. This is not where he's supposed to be.
Steve here again. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Chris Mowery's Vlogging Through History and many other great podcasts. Go over to Parthenon Podcast to learn more. And now here's a quick word from our sponsors. The isolation of Antarctica, even today with modern technology and communications, pretty much when they put them in the summer, and once the winter kicks in, like you're not leaving, and they're prepared with the food and everything, but there's no emergency rescues or anything, and the storms just roll up, and people live pretty well, like on McMurdo and the main bases, but if there's any little sub bases, like they are locked down.
Oh yeah, I mean, and even if you're on one of the nicer bases, like you're inside for months and months with the same people. And I assume even with the modern technology, communication itself is very touch and go, especially if there's like a storm going on. I mean, cabin fever it's a legitimate thing, right? It can start making people go crazy.
It can happen fast too, where if there's any sort of sense that things aren't under control, people just completely spin out of control and they form factions, and because nobody can trust anyone. And especially you throw in this outside factor of an alien that can take over and mimic shapes, and then you just don't even know. I mean, that it's the very thought of that is terrifying. It's terrifying to have lost your connection to the outside world, and say it's just a regular person who just loses it and becomes a serial killer on the base. Like how crazy that would be, let alone something that's just, it's your worst fear you could ever imagine is they're getting plunged into.
Well, and it's the key is there's nowhere to go, right? Like you can't just go outside and be like, well, I'm just going to run to the nearest base. You can't. You're going to die. You're stuck where you are, and there's no way, there's no one else to talk to. It's terrifying to think about. I've often thought about what type of person would actually, willingly go to one of these bases on one of the polar ice caps. It blows my mind.
Don't you think in a way that goes against, like, the movie in a lot of ways is fighting against all of our cultural viewpoints and our probably what's ingrained into us, into our core, that if there's a problem, you either confront it or you run away. And in this situation, they really can't do any. Like MacReady keeps trying to confront it, but he can't really confront the problem, that they don't really know what the problem is.
No, not really. It takes him a little while to figure. I mean, the main doctor, Blair, is this is one thing I thought the movie did pretty well, because he's most of the time it's like, I don't know, the doctors have some kind of eureka moment, and they're like, oh yeah, explains everything. Where Blair's, you can see he's thinking through it, and then he slowly kind of figures it out, like exactly what's going on. Because I mean, they can't really run away from it, and then, because basically what this organism does is it like grabs like a host and then just mimics you. And by the time that the process is all done, you can't tell whether it's the organism, like the infected organism, the alien, or the person that they were before. So on top of it, you're isolated, but also the people that you're, the small group of people that you're living around with, you can't really trust any of them. So you compound that and you're even more isolated, and then the paranoia gets in.
The paranoia too, where the paranoia and the lack of trust in the fact that in the setup of the movie, these are all just a bunch of guys thrown together. They're scientist types. There's nobody is really naturally friends. They're not there as a natural group. They're just people who are thrown together, and they don't have any sort of a real tie to each other, which I think that is what really hits the paranoia it puts the pedal to the metal on the paranoia right away.
Yeah, and I thought that was a good thing that the movie set up pretty well too, is like these guys just kind of seem to have a working, like some of them seem to be a little bit closer to each other than others, but it's a very kind of, I don't know, like a work relationship, right? So who knows how long they've known each other? Maybe they didn't know each other before they even got onto this base. And how long have they been on this base? I don't know. Maybe it's only been a couple of months. You can't really trust somebody within that time frame. And then you add the organism, and it just compounds it even more.
So tell us a little bit more of what you're thinking about this paranoia aspect and how that plays into the movie.
Well, yeah, like I pointed out, I found the first half of the movie really sets up the isolation well, and then once the organism starts going, that's where the paranoia theme seems to take over, and the isolation theme takes a little bit of a step back. And I mean, it just goes, once the paranoia takes over, in my opinion, they do the exact opposite of really what they should do. Like, they start turning on each other when in reality they should have came together. But by the time they come to that realization, though, it's already too late. Like, they have to come to a conclusion. It's like either us or the alien. This alien organism is somehow going to infect the rest of the planet. So they end up having to sacrifice themselves. But if they had worked from the get-go, they might have been able to come up with some kind of game plan to deal with this alien. But they were too paranoid about, who was infected and not infected. I mean, I'm not even really judging them, because I would probably be thinking the same thing myself.
This movie reminds me a lot of a book that you had suggested I read years ago about a group of people who get trapped in a Native American pyramid, and it traps the people in there, and they think that they're going to, I wish I could remember the name of the book, The Ruins. And every group that goes in there thinks that they're going to be the ones who figure it out. And I think it gets back to this can-do attitude that we have that maybe that really finally gets killed in this movie, that we're not going to figure it out. The Norwegians in the camp a couple miles down the road in Antarctica didn't figure out a way to kill the alien, and they did every single thing that our group winds up doing. And it just kind of, it's very it really inverts our feeling that there has to be a resolution. We have to fix this.
Yeah. I mean, they also didn't do themselves any favors too, because initially they were going to save some of these, specimens that they found at their Norwegian base as, part of their scientific discoveries, when very clearly, I don't know about you or me, about me personally, I would have looked at that and be like, oh yeah, that's going like right in the fire. Because there's something about the practical effects, which I think is one of the things that the movie's probably most famous for. They're incredible and they hold up really well. There's something just very unnerving about them, because there's certain parts of it you see a human there, but it's a deformed human. It's I don't know, it's very unsettling.
Even though the technology is a little, it's a little clunky, but like you said, you could see what the symbolism was supposed to mean. And I think that's probably is creepier than if it had 2000, late 2020s, early 2020s special effects. It wouldn't, you need to have that creativity behind the special effects, which I think that the visuals that went through were really spot on.
Yeah, and even John Carpenter's pretty famous for being like a indie style director. I mean, a lot of the stuff that you see in this movie were really cutting edge at the time, and these guys were just kind of figuring it out as they go around. That's why it has such a unique feel to it, because the filmmaker himself really comes across in the movie, where a lot of the modern films now, I just don't really feel. I just don't get a sense that I'm really seeing the filmmaker, like his vision. It just seems like it's made out of we've talked about this before. It seems like it's almost like made out of a factory.
I think so. I think that's true, that you can see when somebody's actually trying to make a piece of art versus just trying to show off. Like, how can we make this alien as cool and as creepy as possible, but not really get any other message through with it?
This film itself is it's heavily influenced, and the novel, I assume, even though I haven't read it myself, it's pretty heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. And there's a lot of people that hate H.P. Lovecraft, and there's a lot of people that love H.P. Lovecraft. And I think I remember you saying you weren't a big fan. So I was a little worried when we decided to do this movie, you weren't going to enjoy it, because it's got H.P. Lovecraft's fingers all over it. And it's like a subgenre in the horror genre. And I've heard it called, I don't know, cosmic horror. I don't really understand what that means. I've always just kind of called it dread horror or nihilistic horror. To me, that what really makes this kind of horror stand out is they all have like a unique theme to it, where like even the alien itself, to me, kind of represents death in a lot of ways, right? Where like human beings are the only kind of creatures on the face that we are, at least that we're aware of, that we're pretty much from really early on, we're self-aware of our own mortality. Like, we know that death is coming right around the corner. It could happen at any time, right? You go outside and get hit by a car, or you get sick, or it's just this constant thing that's hanging over our heads. And it's kind of like The Thing in a lot of ways, where this thing is constantly around you and you're paranoid about it, but there's not really much you can do about it. Yet we keep on fighting it, for the human species, like we continue to procreate, we continue to try to fight death, right? But it's inevitable that death's going to win. And to me, this is kind of like the whole cosmic horror, whatever you want to call it, dread horror, nihilistic horror. This is what makes it unique, is the sense that like a lot of like the monsters that are involved in these stories, to me, they kind of represent this impending doom, this crisis of humanity, in the sense that we understand that death's creeping and it's always around us, yet there's nothing we can do about it. It's really horrific when you actually do sit and think about the fact that we are well aware of this at all times, and yet there's nothing we can do about it, much like the guys on the base.
That's the real monster of the movie, is death, and man himself, the paranoia, the hatred, the violence. That's all the things that are the real monster in the movie. The alien is just a device for us to explore all these different issues.
Yeah.
It really, when you boil down to it.
Yeah, I mean, and that to me, that's why I really enjoy this type of horror. I mean, John Carpenter also did In the Mouth of Madness, which is directly inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. He's always kind of, Prince of Darkness is kind of in a similar kind of vein. He's always kind of dabbled into this type of horror. He also did Halloween, right, which is your typical slasher fare. But it's one of these themes that I've always really enjoyed in horror films, because it is a very difficult question to ask yourself as a human being. Knowing our own mortality, is it, this is kind of going a little bit off the rails here, but I mean, can you really justify like procreating another human being, in the sense of knowing that you're just going to be you're going to be stowing this almost seems like a mistake of nature onto them too. The fact that we're self-aware of our own mortality, we're self-aware that death is around the corner. I mean, there's a lot of philosophers have come to the conclusion that it's not fair. Like, the best thing for the human species to do is just collectively say we're not doing this anymore, and because it's not something that we asked for, and it almost seems like it was an accident, that we're aware that we're all going to die.
Do you think most people live like that, though? Like, death is imminent?
I think people are, I mean, obviously some people take it like to a far more extreme way, but I think most people are aware. Yeah, it is around the corner. I mean, it is, I mean, it's one thing that gives us a little bit of an advantage because we have like a survival mechanism that kicks in, right? But I mean, if I really think about it for a minute, I'm trying to remember, there was a book that came out, I think it's called The Conspiracy of the Human Race, or I'll post it on Facebook so I get it properly. But it basically broke down this theme that I've talked about in terms of in relation to this movie, and it goes through all the major philosophers that have talked about like the fact that we're aware of our own mortality, and then we're aware that death is a thing, where most animals are just not aware of this. At least no, they're not aware of this, not the way human beings are. And we can sit and contemplate it and wonder what happens after we die, or if anything happens after we die. And it usually, for the most human beings, that they, think a little bit, they spend a lot of time thinking about, what's going to happen after my existence ends. It's kind of cruel when you do think about it. I mean, it might be the source of our strength too, though, in the sense that we are aware of it, and yet we continue to fight it, like MacReady, sorry.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. Now, for me, what I really liked about this movie, and I think it comes across in a lot of John Carpenter movies, is the really slow burn. This does not have the standard story arc of, climax and then not even remotely a happy ending. I mean, it's one bad thing that happens to these characters after another. There's really no hope involved. I think in a way it's kind of like They Live, which was Keith David was in that movie as well. I get John Carpenter uses, like a lot of directors, a certain cast of actors that he uses over and over again. But you get that same feel of it, that there's no fixing this, that all the characters can really hope for is they hope to try and fix the situation. And then in the end, they realize that there really is no way for them to survive it, and all they can really do is try to put an end to the danger, even if it kills themselves in the process. And what do you think? What kind of themes come out of that?
I mean, self-sacrifice to a degree, right? I mean, life is pain. I mean, you've been discussing that for probably since we started talking, but a lot more recently. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these characters, none of them asked to be put in this situation, yet they were thrown into it, and yeah, they stumbled, and they made mistakes in the process of coming to the right conclusion, the good conclusion, and the sense of, we might not be able to make it out, and that is what it is, right? But we're gonna try our best to make sure that this organism doesn't reach the rest of humanity. So if that means we have to sacrifice ourselves, then so be it. I mean, the film gets accused of being really nihilistic, and I mean, when we get to the ending, we can talk about that, but it is nihilistic in a lot of ways. It's very unsettling, it's very depressing, and I mean, this is a combination of the music, the slow burn, the fact that it only takes place in a couple of rooms, really adds to this feel. But I mean, at the end of the day, the crew do the right thing in terms of trying their best to stop this organism / alien, whatever you want to call it. And if that means they all have to die doing it, then so be it.
Going back to your idea of humanity being, one of the possibly, maybe probably the only self-aware creature on Earth. I think in a way that's our survival strategy, is that we know that we have to do certain things and certain planning so that our children or our civilization can go onwards. I think that's that idea that we have to plan forward because there is a time when we're not going to be around anymore. And it kind of moves us from just simple animals. Maybe that is what is the real difference between man and beast, is that idea that plans that there's going to be something more after we're gone, and that we in a way have to prepare for that. And we have to, our survival strategy is to prepare that so that our children can go forward, and our, now even growing past just our family, our civilization can go forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, being aware of death is, I mean, it's horrific to think about, but at the same time, it gives us a pretty good leg up in terms of planning ahead, right? Well, we're trying to fight it, and we're going to try to prolong it as long as we possibly can so our next generation can live longer, and then they can live longer. And I mean, maybe it's the secret to our success.
Now, I think one of the things that I really, really liked about this movie is just the feeling of desperation, fear, and hate. And it just plows on from one darker moment to the next. And McCready, the Kurt Russell's character, I think he played that perfectly. And he had enough of that early 80s action swagger and Kurt Russell cool swagger to really pull it off. It was not, I wouldn't say realistic necessarily, but it was very theatrical, and I think it put forward the right tenor for the movie.
Yeah, and I think I think this is one of his better acting performances. Personally, I think the whole cast did a really good job, because it was none of their performances were really over the top. They were all, I think, pretty realistic given the situation, which is what this movie called for, Like, this movie wouldn't work if Nicolas Cage was acting in it. Just so it's a joke, right?
It definitely required a certain amount of subtlety, but not completely subtle. Like it was subtlety and like acting bombastically in the same, like overacting it at the same point. I think that probably wouldn't be something like Nicolas Cage could do it. They had to keep dialing it back and forth to really get to get that whole feeling come through.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, 100%. Like, and I enjoyed the movie for the reasons that you pointed out too. The special effects to me is what I really love the most. I mean, I love the lighting too. There's this blue kind of lighting, especially in the second half of the movie, that kind of just permeates the whole movie. And the music, which is done by Angelo Badalamenti, who did the music for a lot of David Lynch's movies, is incredible. It's not a score that will jump out to you right away. It's just, it really sets up like this impending doom, because it's very, I don't know, it's not heavy, right?
Well, let's talk a little bit before we talk about some of the things that we didn't love so much about the movie. Let's talk about the ending. The ending is really the most powerful point of the movie, I would say. What are your ideas on the ending?
Yeah, so to set it up, the group comes to the conclusion that, well, they're not going to make it, but for sure the alien's not going to make it either if they're not going to make it. So they've come to the conclusion that they're just going to blow the whole base up. And they pull it off. We see Kurt Russell seems to have blown up the host alien thing. That's the impression that we get. Cuts to a scene where he's just kind of lying and on the ground in the middle of like a small, well, it's not, the storm's not going on, but it's obviously freezing going on in the rubble of the base, that whatever's left over, right? Because they blew it all up. And Childs shows up and they start talking, and Kurt Russell asks him, like, where were you, buddy? And Child's like, well, I got lost with the rest of the group. I was chasing down Blair, and just get the sense of, is he telling the truth or has he changed? And Kurt Russell's going to get it next.
And really, if that was the case, that Childs was the thing, and then he goes and kills or whatever, subsumes Kurt Russell, it still dies there. It can't go any further, I believe. I guess then maybe that was kind of one of the weaker moments, because the dog was infected and he ran from the Norwegian base. Like, where does Childs go? Does he just wait? Is that like the breakout moment when somebody from the outside world finally does come and discovers what's going on, and he's completely taken on a human human form, and that's what's going to make him take over the whole world then?
Yeah, I think maybe, right? It's not, I mean, it would have been, I guess, a little bit better if they made it clear in the movie. Say, I don't know, the Norwegians heard about what happened on the base here, and then like the Americans got caught wind of what happened on the base here, so they're sending somebody to figure out like what's going on. And then Childs would infect that person if he was infected, and then the rest is history. I don't know. So it's been up for a big debate. Is Childs an alien or is he not an alien? I mean, I have a little theory myself, but
I would say as a movie, when you have a movie like that, that's a lot of other directors and screenwriters have failed to end a movie like that. And I would say that was a satisfying ending, even though it was a cliffhanger ending. What's your theory on it?
I mean, if you watch Kurt Russell when he's talking in the final scene, you see him breathing, and it's like it's like a chimney coming out, right? Because it's cold. But if you see Childs, there's no breath coming off of them. And then there's just a little thing where we see that Kurt Russell loves drinking. He just wants to get drunk, like before all this stuff happens. And, he loves his scotch. He picks up a bottle and he doesn't drink it. And I just have a feeling that maybe that was like one of those Molotov cocktails or something that they were using. And it was like had kerosene oil in or something in it. And he hands it to Childs, and Childs takes the swing right away. And then he just laughs because he kind of like, he knows, oh yeah, he's an alien. That's what I think personally, but just two little hints. But I mean, maybe that just means nothing. I don't know.
Yeah, it really could. I mean, I think when you have somebody like John Carpenter, you're always looking for what are those little hints that he's giving us. And I think that that's probably the whole point of it, is that they want us to delve into it and think of it that way. They're not going to hand it to us on a silver platter.
I mean, I think Childs turned, but I mean, it doesn't really change what Kurt Russell did. I mean, he sacrificed himself in an attempt to try to do the right thing, in destroying this alien. And, maybe it succeeds. Maybe the alien just, that host, it just freezes and that's it, right? Or I don't know, maybe the human race gets unlucky and a polar bear comes near it or something like that, and it gets infected, and then people go study polar bears get infected or what have you. I mean, or maybe he didn't change and they successfully stopped this thing, whatever it is, but they had to die in the process of doing it. I mean, that's what makes this film unique in the sense of most horror films, as grim and bleak as a lot of them are, usually somebody gets away. In this one, nobody gets away. That's what you mentioned in the movie, the book, The Ruins. That's what I really liked about The Ruins, is the fact that nobody got away, and then they totally screwed it up in the movie because somebody got away.
Yeah, that's missing the point entirely.
Yeah, it's missing it entirely. And most, I'm sure, like when this film came out, or they brought it to the producers of the studio, and they're like, "What do you mean nobody survives? He's got to survive. Somebody's got to, somebody's got to be the hero." I'm sure they weren't too happy about it.
let's maybe wrap this up with what were some of the things that you didn't love about the movie? I mean, of everything that the things that I didn't really are things that I generally don't like about movies like this is that it was a slow burn. And I find myself getting distracted in slow burns. And this was a really slow burn. What didn't you love about the movie and that you could maybe tweak to make it a little better?
I would have liked to have seen stuff of the alien ship a little bit more. Maybe they go inside it and, check it out. I would have liked them to like just done a little bit more in terms of just how just crazy the Antarctic is in the sense of like snow blindness and like the storms and, maybe showing somebody who fell off the line or whatever. And then they didn't even get infected. They just froze to death outside in the storm. I would have liked a little bit more of that, but I mean, like I said, this is one of my favorite horror films.
We're setting up for the next couple of movies that we do are in the horror genre, and we're going to a little bit different with our next movie with Fright Night, the remake of Fright Night from the about a decade ago, the early-ish 2000s. So I think I hope you join us for that. I hope you enjoyed today. Chris, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Just watching this movie, this is like one of my favorite quotes. It's one of the dogs is changing, and the guy who's in charge of I guess he's like the dog guy or what have you, sees it changing or what have you, and he goes and grabs the other guys, and he has this great line in the movie where I don't know what the hell is in there, but it's weird and pissed off. I just broke out laughing when I thought that. What was the other thing is the Blair becomes infected or whatever, and the alien is building a spaceship out of like parts from a helicopter or something like that. And I thought that was like John Carpenter adding like a little bit of like comic relief to the movie. Other than that, I mean, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast, and we're doing Fright Night, and then you're letting me indulge my Nightmare on Elm Street fandom after that.
Yeah, I think that's my final takeaway is that I love these movies, especially John Carpenter. They're not afraid to be a little cheesy, and I think it's very planned cheesiness, but it makes the movies just a lot more entertaining, that they're not taking themselves completely seriously, and that just little element of comedy, I think, just completely makes these movies.
Well, and they have like heart, right? John Carpenter, I've always considered kind of like a punk rock like director in the sense that he's very indie. It's very do it yourself, and we just don't have that in film nowadays. Everything's so glossy and overproduced, and do you understand what I'm saying? In the sense that like you watch this movie and you see like they're just kind of figuring it out as they go along, or it seems like you watch a movie like Escape from New York or Big Trouble in Little Chinatown is another one that I really like that he did. And then you can tell that like Carpenter just showed up to set and they figured out something quickly, and you know what I mean? Like it just has an authentic feel to it. They don't feel like they were produced out of a factory. It's like music. I'll use an example, the difference between like overproduced music and music that still has an indie quality to it.